Welcome to Lair the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Judas Priest's 1976 album, Sad Wings of Destiny. I love this album cover. It's one of my favorite album covers of all time. I'm a sucker for anything with angels and wings and stuff like that, and this cover is just great. It screams epic. And even the back cover is one of my favorite back covers of all time. Always loved the live band shots, and the silhouette of Rob here I think is just awesome and sort of adds to the mystique of this epic, really in some ways, groundbreaking, pushing the boundaries, early metal album. I like this album cover so much I even have a picture disc of it. I'm not a huge fan of picture discs because of the sound quality, but love this cover so much that I had to grab this when I saw it. This is the second album from Judas Priest, and it was released on a small label called Gold Records, who released their first two albums, their first album being Rock-a-Rolla. And this may be a topic for another video, but this is an example of a band. They apparently signed away their rights to this album forever, and so whenever Priest do their remasters or they do a compilation record, they're never able to include, or they usually don't include stuff from these albums because Gold Records apparently owns the rights to this from what I guess is forever, and Gold has repackaged these albums numerous times. They've put out greatest hits records that only contain songs from their first two albums. So this for me is the first Judas Priest, where Judas Priest really starts to become Judas Priest. I like Rock-and-Rolla quite a bit, their first album, but they're still sort of experimenting on that album. You can hear sort of bluesy type stuff, more psychedelic experimental stuff. There is heavy stuff on Rock-a-Rolla, but it's really here on Sad Wings where the sound of the band comes together. The album features, of course, Rob Halford, one of, if not the greatest heavy metal vocalist of all time. His vocal prowess in multi-octave range is on full display on this album. Glenn Tipton and KK Downing on twin guitars, which was sort of a unique thing at this time. There were other bands that did it, like Wishbone Ash, but putting it in this heavy of a context was a really unique thing at that time. Glenn Tipton even playing some piano on this album, Ian Hill on bass, and Alan Moore on drums. Alan being the second drummer in the band at this point. Rock-a-Rolla featured John Hinch on drums, who sadly just passed away right as I was getting ready to make this video. I heard the news of that, and I'm sure I will be doing a video on Rock-a-Rolla at some point. So John Hinch, rest in peace. The album was produced by Jeffrey Calvert, Max West in the band, and the production is pretty good. It's a little dated sounding. It's a little lacking in kind of bite and high end. They really hadn't quite gotten their sound from a production standpoint quite together yet, but it's not distracting or anything. I think it still works on the record. You could, they were on a very tight shoestring budget, so if there was maybe a little bit more money involved, maybe they could have gotten a little bit more of a stronger guitar sound on the album. But I've heard this album so many times like this that I wouldn't want to hear it any other way, and kind of the production on it adds to the vibe of the record for me in a lot of ways. So the album starts with one of Priest's, most recognizable songs, especially from their 70s era, Victim of Changes. I love the fade-in intro on this, the way the guitars just build up. And then there's that sort of bluesy walking down guitar line and that super cool heavy riff. The call and response thing in the verse is great. Reminds me a little bit of like Black Dog from Led Zeppelin. Rob showing off his vocal range. The part in the song where it does the "you been foolin'," those sort of choppy things, is really cool, and it goes into that awesome like wah lead solo, that tone on the lead. I've always dug this about Judas Priest. I don't know if I think that's KK Downing, where he always has a little bit of, sounds like there's a little bit of a effect on his guitar and it's just ready to explode out of the speakers. The mellow part in the song where everything drops down is really cool with the well, she was beautiful. That sort of trippy part is awesome. And then it builds back up again, and Rob does those great high screams, victim of changes, just so epic. And Rob, throughout this whole record, he does this where he shows off all the parts of his range. The quiet, mellow part has got him in his lower range. The verses sort of have him in his upper range. And then he's just in that upper stratosphere range, which Rob, maybe only Ian Gillan at this time having that kind of thing. But Rob really is able to control that really high screaming range and really sing in that range. Whereas for me, Ian Gillan would just kind of use it as an effect. But Rob seems to take that and really find a way to just use it in the song with lyrics and everything. It's awesome. And there's a part in his song that I sort of forgot because he doesn't really do this live, but as I was listening to it, it's so cool. He does this like, this like thing, like it's sort of pulled back in the mix, but just like this sort of yell thing that I think is just really, really fantastic and cool. All right, the next track is The Ripper, and I love this sort of weird like guitar harmony thing at the intro here, just a short little thing, and then Rob comes in over that simple chugging riff, but you're in for a surprise, you're in for a shot. And there's like all these vocals, and there's like one that's just like crazy high, man, just awesome. Rob's voice is almost like an instrument in a lot of ways. It's got a heavy grooving riff in the verse, and there's these almost like classical guitar lines, something Iron Maiden would take and really kind of make their own later on. So I love things that have a little bit of a neoclassical vibe to them, and you hear that on some of the riffs in this song. Next is Dreamer Deceiver. It's got a really mellow acoustic guitar going on in it. This is one where Rob shows off all the parts of his range. He does this really low range, melancholy like thing in the verse where he's down really low with this really sort of round, bassy sound to his voice. Then he moves up into like a more upper range with his set in the cosmos part, and then it goes even higher where there's like these screeches up high, and it's just like shows off Rob's like massive like 3-4 octave range. So cool. And the song builds at the end, a really climactic epic build at the end of the song. So it's just a really cool, so Priest experimented with this back in the 70s where they had these sort of mellow songs, and it's something that I think they got away from in the 80s, and I wish that they hadn't, because this is a really awesome kind of moody, dramatic, epic song. Then that segues right into Deceiver, and it's got a heavy, galloping, really classic metal sounding, really forward thinking metal sounding riff. There really weren't, Priest was really ahead of their time. Yeah, like Rainbow was doing very metal-like things. Purple had stuff, of course, Black Sabbath, but this kind of like galloping riff that would become a signature of like Iron Maiden or Accept later when the 80s came around. Priest was doing this really early on here in 1976. It's got an incredible guitar sound in it. That sort of main chugging riff is just, it's not a super saturated guitar sound, so you can really hear like the chugging on it. It sounds like the guitars are really up front. And then there's this quick, abrupt stop, and it goes into these classical guitars, which I just love. I've mentioned this before. Anytime you throw in like a classical, like acoustic guitar thing, it just screams epic to me, and I love it. Side 2 starts with Prelude, which has this like pulsating piano thing in the beginning, and it almost has this like dramatic, cinematic, orchestral type vibe. Maybe if they had a bigger budget, they might have put more sounds in that and made it even more dramatic, but as it is, it's still really cool. And then this moves right into Tyrant with its like triumphant sort of studded wristband, fist in the air riff. It's got these great I love the background vocals in this where they sort of keep layering on top of each other. You got Tyrant, Tyrant, Tyrant. It just keeps building. It's just so cool. Great melodic lead, and this also like the lead in this really makes me think of Ritchie Blackmore. It's got like a little bit of a neoclassical type vibe to it with these arpeggios in it, and it's got a real just sort of Blackmore feel to it for me. Genocide is next with a fantastic main riff. This one I like a little bit better on Unleashed in the East because they pick up the energy a little bit on Unleashed. They pick up the tempo a little, and I think it brings a little more life to it. I like the spoken word part in this where he goes sin after sin, which would, of course, would be the album title of their next album. And it's got this like chugging riff ending thing that is just awesome. Epitaph is next. This is a really kind of interesting one. It has Rob is almost in like this crooner voice in this. It has like a Broadway type of feel. You sort of picture Rob sort of, there's a piano in it, him like just sort of leaning up against the piano for this. And there's all these layered, very Queen-like vocals, you know, maybe vocals you might have heard on like the second Queen album, which I think is really interesting, the way the vocals kind of come in and out. And then it goes into Island of Domination. This was one of my picks. I did a deep cuts episode with my friends Darren and Mike, and this was one of my deep cut picks. I love the guitar intro, the way it fades in. It sounds like sort of like a helicopter. It's just awesome the way it brings the song in, and Rob with his dramatic vocals, and there's this propelling riff that just drives the song forward, and then the tempo drops back in the song, then it drops down into this like heavy Sabbath like riff that is just so cool, and Rob wailing over the top. And I love the ending when it goes into the Island of Domination. There's all these like sort of layered, delayed Rob voices. So all right, there you go. Sad Wings of Destiny. What an amazing record. You know, depending on the day of the week, you might ask me. I might pick this as my favorite Priest album of all time, and definitely one of my favorites from the 70s. From Ask Me on a different day, I might say Stained Class, but I ain't going to argue with anybody that picks this as one of their favorite Priest records, and just an early example of really moving into, you know, moving from the heavy 70s stuff and really pushing us towards what metal would become in the 80s. So, okay, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of this epic album, Sad Wings of Destiny. Facebook, Lair the Alchemist, Twitch, Lair the Alchemist. Also, make sure you follow the Lair the Alchemist Spotify playlist. I'll put a couple songs from this album up there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.